All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. We appreciate our live audience here, and we appreciate you if you're watching after the fact. My name is Jesse Stife. I'm the past president of the Reading League Florida. We're super excited to be joined by Lisa Klein from our friends at Keys to Literacy for tonight's webinar, Spotlight on Sentence Structure for Grades K through 5. Just a couple of quick words before we get into it. I want to encourage everyone to keep up with your state chapter of the Reading League. If you're not joining us from Florida, you can find us here at the Florida chapter on Facebook and on Twitter or on our website at fl.thereadingleague.org. We're always sharing high quality resources that are directly applicable for teachers and other stakeholders, leaders, parents. So please follow us on social media if you're so inclined. While you're on our pages, I'll encourage everyone to consider making a donation. It helps kind of keep the high quality PD coming. We're an all volunteer 501c3 organization. And so we do this for free in our spare time, and every penny goes right back into the organization. And we always aim to keep all of our resources, like tonight's wonderful webinar, totally free. For tonight, we've opened up the Q&A function, and we welcome our live participants to ask questions during the presentation. I believe that is all for our housekeeping duties here. So I just want to take a second. It's my pleasure to introduce Lisa Klein. Lisa she's had a long career in education as a classroom teacher, a special education teacher, a reading specialist, and a professional development specialist who regularly presents around the country. She's doing some amazing work with Keys to Literacy, and the floor is yours, Lisa. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Jesse, and welcome everyone. So I have a jam-packed hour for us because there's so much I want to talk to you about as it relates to writing. And just for a little bit of context, Joan Sedita, who is the founder of Keys to Literacy and the author of The Writing Rope, came and did part one with you. And then my colleague, fellow Vice President Shauna Cotty, came in and did a session for helping with adolescent writers and using the writing process. So today, in this last part, we're really going to focus on pieces that come from both of those. So when we think about Joan's Writing Rope, we're going to think about that strand of syntax. And then I'm also going to pull from two of our professional development offerings, of which I co-edited both, Keys to Early Writing and Keys to Content Writing. Okay. So our goals for our session today is I really want to think about, hold on, so sorry. What are the research recommendations that are out there and how can we use those to lead to effective writing instruction? I want to always give you practical suggestions that you can think about using with your students tomorrow as we're looking to help build syntactic awareness for them. And importantly, which Joan started this conversation with you, I want to talk about how we can use writing as a tool to increase both comprehension and written expression. And so we'll make some of those connections today. Okay. I'm going to encourage you to make a 2-column note as we go through our session today. And I passed on to Jesse handout so that you can also have that as we go through. But I'd like to think about, as we're going through this, what are you already using? What is an aha for you? And then what's one thing that you really want to remember to bring into your instructional practice this week? Okay. So we use the 2-column note. You can use whatever format you'd like. Let's just talk a little bit about the research highlights here. And we just want to make this really strong connection between reading and writing. There's been a lot of focus in our field around reading instruction, which is really important, and we need that. But we also need to think about paying close attention to writing and how we can support our students here. So as we think about this reading-writing connection and we show the comparison of the reading rope and the writing rope, we want to think about how is it that reading supports writing, and conversely, how does writing support reading? And what we want to teach our kids to do, particularly kindergarten through 5th grade, is to Read like writers. And when you read like a writer, what you're thinking about is, how did this writer build this piece? What kind of moves did they make? And we're going to start thinking about that at the sentence level. Okay. Now, there's this excellent IES report called Teaching Elementary School Students to Be Effective Writers. This is open source for anyone, so you can get this by Googling it. What's really nice about these IES practice guides is that they're built to be practical for you. So there were 4 key recommendations that came out of this practice guide, and I want to review those with you now, and I want to think about, again, what are you already doing with your students, and then what are some small tweaks or adjustments that you could make to get closer to these research recommendations. So the first one is provide daily time for students to write. Just in the chat, just write, how many minutes do you suppose that is a day that's recommended here? And Jesse, I can't actually see the chat, so maybe if someone writes in it, you could just tell me what numbers they're saying.
I will let you know. We have some contemplative folks who are chewing on it.
Okay, 30 more seconds here to think about what it might be. How much time daily would you provide for your students to write, do you think? Any takers in the chat, Jesse?
We don't have takers. We're all on the edge of our
Or
seat.
on the edge of your seat. Okay, I'll let you know. 60 minutes is the recommendation, right? And so when we think about 60 minutes, what we want to think about is not 60 quiet minutes with kids sitting at their seats, working independently on writing. We want to think about, when is there time for direct explicit instruction? When is there opportunity for oral rehearsal and discussion and practice collaboratively? And then when is there time for them to write independently? We also want to think about, and this sentence work is a perfect way to do it, can you have your students write a little bit in science, a little bit in social studies, a little bit in math, so that they are having multiple opportunities to increase the amount that they're writing across their day. The next recommendation is that we need to teach students to use the writing process for a variety of purposes. Unfortunately, for many students, they think the writing process equals finding all their mistakes. And what we want to say is that really what good writers do is they use the writing process to make sure that the message that they are trying to convey to their reader gets across to them. And so good writers move through the writing process, okay? Recommendation number 3 is really important, right? Because recommendation number 3 says kids need to have fluency with things like handwriting and spelling, typing, word processing, and importantly, you notice in there sentence construction, right? So when we're thinking about this fluency, we know, and I'm going to show you a model in a little bit, but we know the working memory has only so much room, right? And if my working memory is focused on how do I form this letter, how do I spell this word, it's really hard to keep that larger composition of thought in mind. Okay, so they need that automaticity with some of those skills. And then fourth, really also very important, is that we need to create an engaged community of writers. So what does that mean? It's not just a feel-good principle, right? It means that we need students to feel like they are invested in our writing community, that they are members of that community, that I, as the teacher, am leading it, and that it is a place where we can make mistakes. We know that writing is not perfect the first time, so we want to offer opportunities to move through that writing process, right? So those 4 recommendations are really important, and I encourage you to download, read that report over, share it with your colleagues, have some discussion at your buildings about it. And then I want to share this not so simple view of writing for some of you who are in Joan's session. You may have seen this. If you weren't there, just want to look at this model, because this model is one more way for us to think about, why is writing so complex? And so when we look at this model from Berenger and Wynne, we think about, okay, we have transcription, we have executive function, we have text generation, and sitting at the center of all of that is working memory. And so when we're thinking about this not so simple view of writing, it's really important to recognize why writing can present such a challenge for so many of our students. Okay. All right. In all things we do at Keys to Literacy, we always talk about gradual release of responsibility. This is not ours. This is Pearson and Gallagher, but it remains true. We know that our students need direct, explicit instruction. They need to hear us thinking aloud about how we put the pieces together. They need opportunities to be in guided practice. This is where they'll have those oral rehearsal opportunities to work collaboratively, small groups, partners with the teacher before we release them to work independently. And what the research tells us, it's very clear. There needs to be explicit instruction of both writing skills and strategies to be able to support students. Okay, now, you may be familiar with the MTSS structure. When we think about these practices that I want to share with you today, at baseline, this is solid tier 1 instruction for everyone, okay? I also want to offer you some scaffolds that you can put into place to help those students who may be needing tier 2 or tier 3 support, okay? All right, let's dive into syntax and sentences. So I want to draw your attention here to the literacy standards. And we know there was Common Core, and then states do their own version of there, but somewhere in there are typically some language standards. And the reason why those language standards play such an important role, K-5, is while we often have writing standards, the writing standards are more about the larger pieces of text that kids are going to write, right? They talk about having the 3 different types of writing. They talk about using task, audience, and purpose. In the language standards is where you really hold the sentence construction. So do your students know how different words function in different sentences? Do they know the 4 types of sentences and the ending punctuation? And what you see across most of these language standards is that there's something in there about orally and in writing. Okay, so I would encourage you to really take a look at the language standards as you're thinking about the articulation K-5 of your students' progress with sentence writing. Okay, so when we think about syntax and syntactic awareness, what we're trying to really build is our students' sentence sense, right? And we know that oral language plays a really big role in student syntactic awareness. So can they hear the difference between mommy is calling daddy or daddy is calling mommy? How does that change? What sounds better, swims the turtle or the turtle swims? And why, right? So we want to work on these sentence building activities to support that growing sentence sense. Now, what we want to do is we want to ground all of this work in what you're already teaching your students. So you don't need to go to Teachers Pay Teachers to get worksheets on any of these sentence activities. We want to think about what sentences are you reading with your students? What sentences are you learning about in science and social studies and math? Because we know that the role of sentences within text are these building blocks, right? And they, one by one, whether it's orally or in writing, this is how we communicate our ideas. And so we really want to think about how do sentences affect both comprehension as well as written expression. All right, I want to share this top-down topic web with you about sentences. And today we're going to cover both sides of the web. So we're going to talk about the red side, which are teaching sentence basics. That includes the 2 parts of a sentence and 4 kinds of sentences. We're also going to talk about the blue side, developing syntactic awareness, and what kind of activities can we do to support developing syntactic awareness, both orally as well as in writing. Okay, so we're going to look at each of these. As we're doing that, though, I want you to think about today's session is really targeted kindergarten through 5th grade. So that's a huge, difference of kids' abilities and strengths and where they are. So as I'm showing these things to you, what I'd like you to think about is for each of these, What is it that you want your students to know or be able to do as a result of each of these activities? And as we're thinking about them, think about that gradual release of responsibility. I'm going to model. We'll have multiple opportunities to practice doing these together, and then students can be released as they're ready to apply on their own. Okay? So let's start on the sentence basics side, and let's think about this reading writing connection we were talking about. So, one of the other strands in Jones rope is text structure, and text structure refers to how a piece of writing is built. And the reason why that matters is because what the research tells us is that text structure, a kid's sense of text structure, impacts both their comprehension and their written expression, right? So it's really important, and this is why we want our kids to read like writers, is to think about how that piece of writing is built from the perspective of both a reader and a writer, okay? So we'll start off really simple with these two sentence parts. And you're going to notice that we have this book, One Tiny Turtle, which we use in our training. And the reason why we use that book is to further illustrate the point that you don't need extraneous worksheets from this. You have so much content that you have to get through with your students that you want to move through. Use that as the springboard for these types of activities, okay? So first we start off with, what is a sentence? So we know that a simple sentence has two major parts, a naming part and an action part. You may call them the noun and the verb. Again, I want you to think about kindergarten to fifth grade. Where are your students? So we want to identify that with our students. And then we can do things like categorizing. So here, from One Tiny Turtle, we're taking different words that came right out of the book, and we're identifying, is it a naming part, is it an action part? Importantly, what you want your students to do after they identify, is it naming or action, is explain how do they know. So you want to offer those opportunities for them to be able to share their thinking aloud with others, okay? We can do this on cards. Okay, so if we have these sentence part cards, you'll notice that we're doing yellow and blue. So in one activity of this, we could say, okay, if we're talking about sea turtles, that would be our naming card. I can give a choice of two action cards. Which one makes sense according to the mentor text? Sea turtles is about loggerheads. Sea turtles travel thousands of miles, right? So they would pick the appropriate one and explain their thinking. We could make this more complex by providing two naming parts and two action parts and having kids then match that way. Now you may be saying, Lisa, this is a writing workshop. They're not writing anything right now. And I want you to know that, remember, one of our goals is to really develop that syntactic awareness and really build through oral language first their opportunity to have that strong sentence sense. So without having to write it, and for kids for whom writing is a struggle, they're still working on building that capacity through these types of activities. Okay, so how are we scaffolding this to support our students? Well, we have the color that we talked about. We can also start with capital letters. We can end with our punctuation, right? If you want to make it more complex, so maybe now we're at third or fourth grade, we can think about, okay, if we give one sentence part, can the students then generate the second part, right? And maybe they're doing this collaboratively in strategic partnerships. It becomes a comprehension assessment when we do it this way, because they can't say the mother turtle flew through the sky because we've just read a nonfiction text where that does not happen, right? So how they build their sentence has to remain true to the mentor text from which they're building. Okay, and then as they get older, right, we look at the language standard and it says that by fourth grade, students should be able to recognize, is it a sentence or a fragment? And if it is a fragment, are they able to correct it? So here we're sorting, right? We can do this in pocket charts. We can do this lots of ways with our students. But if it is a fragment, then the opportunity is for them to work again, maybe in partnerships or independently, to change it from a fragment to a complete sentence. Okay, so that's the two parts. Let's talk about the four types of sentences. What I want to say here is sometimes things get lost in translation. And somewhere along the line, it became we need to know the four types of sentences so we can identify them on a worksheet. And that is really not our goal, right? Our goal is we want to empower our students to know how to use many different types of sentences so that they can, again, what's our goal? Make sure that I, as the writer, can get my message across to my reader. And by using different types of sentences, that really helps me hone my message. So the idea here is that students by first grade, the end of first grade, would know these different types of sentences, right? Think about what are those different types of punctuation that go along with them, and you would notice this. Notice these sentences as you're reading in science, in social studies, in math. Notice the punctuation, right? And then what we want our students to do, the ultimate goal, is to have them bring these different sentences into the work that they are doing, the writing that they are doing. So let's look at a couple of activities here that you can use. So we're back at the pocket charts here again, right? And so here what we're doing is we're having students sort, again, not irrelevant sentences, but sentences that come from the text. So repeated exposure to the vocabulary and the concepts that they're learning through this sorting activity, right? We can also do something like this with spelling words that they may have be working on, vocabulary words, have them build the different types of sentences that way. Another activity here where students are identifying what is the type of sentence, what is the ending punctuation, and again, all the sentences come right out of the text that we are reading. Okay, now it gets a little more complex. So now what we want to do is we want to challenge students to think about, okay, how can we take a statement and turn it into a question? And I want you to be thinking about what kind of direct explicit instruction will your students need from you to be able to do that, right? And how can you have opportunities for them to practice this together collaboratively before we would release them to do it independently? Same thing with question to a statement, question to a command or exclamation, right? So here we go. Okay. Good. And then we can have them create one of each type here. This is going along with the social studies unit that they were doing in first grade and writing all different kinds of sentences and being able to practice all those important skills that we need around the fine motor, right? And having appropriate spacing for our students and building in opportunities to practice with those different types of sentences. In this example, students are the ones who actually go into the mentor text and they find themselves the different types of sentences and they identify what page number they found those on. Okay. Now, when we're thinking about this, we can also really lean into sentence frames. As you're thinking about a scaffold, remember what a scaffold is. It's a temporary support that we put into place to help our students, right? We want to remember that we don't use them forever. We gradually release them as kids gain their proficiency. So as we're thinking about sentence frames, we can think about how can we scaffold, particularly if we want to do compound or complex sentences. We can also think about how could you provide kids with things like where phrases or when phrases to help them be able to build onto the writing that they are doing. And I'll show you some examples when we get into expanded kernel sentences of that. Okay. All right. So that was our teaching sentence basic side of the equation. I'm going to pause though, Jesse, just in case anyone had a question. Do we have any questions?
We have no questions so far.
Okay, good. Let's keep going then. So that's teaching sentence basics. We're going to talk about the developing syntactic awareness. But what I want to say to you is we don't only do teaching sentence basics to proficiency and then we move into developing syntactic awareness. We're actually going to do these in concert. Okay. So we want to think about we're going to have a sentence station in our classroom or a sentence center, and we could be rotating these activities all the time using all the content that you're already teaching students for them to have these multiple opportunities to practice with sentences. One of the other things, based on my experience as an elementary teacher and reading specialist, is that oftentimes we've been in a rush to get to kids to paragraph writing. And in that rush to get to paragraph writing, they really haven't had the opportunity to develop their solid sentence construction skills. So this provides them the opportunity to get that repeated practice, right? And it doesn't mean they can't be writing paragraphs also, but that we really want to spend the time to help them build their syntactic awareness, okay? We already looked at this, right? We're thinking about what is our goal here? Our goal is to give many, many opportunities for students to practice manipulating the different parts of sentences, okay? And we're going to look at these 3 different activities. So the sentence scramble, which is formally called sentence anagram, sentence elaboration, and sentence combining. These activities are helpful for all students, especially helpful for our multilingual learners as well. Let's start with sentence scrambles. And I know many of you are going to be very familiar with this, right? So what is the sentence scramble? Well, basically here, students manipulate the words into complete sentences. We can start off with something really basic, like you see here, where we're embedding pictures as well as words, right? We can think about how are we using, again, our mentor text, so you're not feeling like you have to go anywhere else to find extraneous worksheets. Let's use the text that they're already in, right? Think about those vocabulary words. I'm going to share with you a set of steps that you can use with students. We'll start by providing our students with the sentences, but then as they gain their proficiency, students can write their own sentences and have a partner unscramble those sentences, okay? So let's look at an example together. Okay. So this again is from One Tiny Turtle. So let's look at this first one. We have night, wait, the, until, hatchlings. Where will we begin? So what you want to do when you're doing this with your students, and I love it on index cards, or if you have Promethean board that you can move them around, that's really helpful for students, right? But we want to think about, all right, where are we going to start with this? So we're going to start with hatchlings, right? What do the hatchlings do? They wait. They wait when? Until night, okay? So you are going to model and think aloud this process for your students. And again, what I want you to think about, particularly for those kids who have dysgraphia or who struggle with handwriting or spelling, that we're taking that element out for right now so that they can develop that syntactic awareness. And by having these on the cards, it allows them to do that manipulation. It's not to say we never need them to write. Of course we do, but we're really thinking about what is our goal in this task right now, okay? Same thing here. All right, where are we going to start? Long A flippers turtle, her flaps front. All right, I'm going to start with turtle. What does the turtle do? Turtle flaps, okay? The turtle, not the, a turtle flaps, a turtle flaps. Her front long flippers. Well, do we say front long flippers? No, we sort of think of front flippers as a part of the turtle's body. So we'll probably keep those together. So we would say a turtle flaps her long front flippers, okay? Now, here's the cards, right? And we could have these out. They could be manipulating them. You could do it on Post-it notes. For our youngest learners, we have this at our website, which is for free. You can download it for free at keysliteracy.com. But this is a set of steps. And remember, a set of steps is a scaffold. A set of steps basically is a task analysis. Here's what you need to go through, right? So here, what do they do first? They cut out each word. They put the words in order to make a sentence. Then we read the sentence to our friend and ask, does it make sense? If yes, then we glue it on the line. Then we write the sentence on the line. Then we can draw a picture that goes with the sentence. And so here's the template. So a set of steps is a scaffold, and a template is a scaffold because the template holds the space for kids to do the writing. So here's that template, and then here's an example of what this looks like. So here's the sentence, the turtle swims. Notice that we've got a capital and a period here to help provide that for our students. And then here she is trying to get her writing done. And what a beautiful picture of a turtle we have. Okay. Now, we can see lots of examples of this. And what is really great about it, so they read The Very Hungry Caterpillar, and they all have the same paper here. But what I want you to notice is this student says, you can take just one, and then look what she did. She added lollipop, right? This student says, you can take just one, and this student says, you can just take one. All correct. So when we're thinking about these opportunities, we're thinking about there are different ways that we can do this as long as they're syntactically appropriate, right? What you don't want to do is have, this was me the first time I did this activity in a live training about, I don't know, 8 years ago. I had these 12 cards. The line was from one corner of the room to the other with teachers up there. We need to think about starting small for our students. Simple sentences, move into more complex, and then think about how can you put into place some scaffolds to support all of your students, okay? All right, so that is the sentence scramble. Let's talk about sentence elaboration. So when we're thinking about elaboration, we're thinking about how do students basically expand and add details to simple sentences, right? And we want to think about elaboration has to be meaningful. We're not adding words just to make our sentences longer. We're going to think about what's our goal. Our goal is for our reader to understand the message that we're trying to convey. So are there some more details that I could add to help my reader better understand the message that I'm trying to get across in my writing? So we're going to talk about that with our students. I'm going to show you some W cards, which are scaffolds that you can use to help your students. Think about the value of word lists to help expand some word choice. And then I'm going to show you those expanded kernel sentences that we talked about. Again, just like we talked about the 4 types of sentences not living in isolation on a worksheet, the goal is for students to know and understand those 4 types of writing, 4 types of sentences so that they can bring them into their writing. Same thing with elaboration. This is not just an activity that we do on the side. This is an excellent activity to work on during revision when we want our students to think about how can they make their writing stronger, right? So we want to make the connection for them to that. Also for free on the website at keysliteracy.com in the free resource section, you can download these W cards. You can also make your own W cards, but the idea is when students are sharing their writing, rather than trying to fix it, we can ask them questions for them to tell us more, right? And we want to model that so that students, as writing partners, would be able to ask each other questions that they have about their writing. So these question cards, for the scaffold, we can start off with by showing how do we add more to our writing? What else are we thinking about? What else are we wondering about, right? And then what happens is our students will internalize them. And as they internalize them, they won't need to hold the cards anymore because they'll be thinking of these question terms as they're writing to try and anticipate what might their reader be wondering, okay? So let's look at this. So this is an illustration from One Tiny Turtle. And maybe I have a student who writes, the turtle swims. How might I use those W cards to help elaborate this sentence. And I want you to lean into using pictures with your students, because for students who struggle with word retrieval, having that picture there can help pull some of the language for them, right? So we might say, where does the turtle swim, right? And what we just learned was this is called seaweed. And so we can say, the turtle swims into the seaweed. And then further in this book, what we learned is that this is called a loggerhead turtle. So we might say, the loggerhead turtle swims into the seaweed, right? And again, value the opportunities for oral rehearsal. The oral rehearsal is really important because it allows that composition of thought before we put it into writing, okay? Now, as students get a little bit older, we can introduce this template here of expanding sentences, right? So your simple sentence, subject predicate goes here. The question words would go here. And then students are adding notes. We're not writing whole sentences here. If you have your kids write whole sentences here, and then you say you have to write it again down here, anarchy. Why would we do that, right? We'll just have them bullet the phrases that they want to take into their completed sentence. So let's look at an example. So if we say the turtle swims, I might say, what turtle? The green one. Okay, how does it swim? Fast. So now we take our sentence, the turtle swims, and we see the green turtle swims fast, right? So what happens sometimes, because we have so many papers that we have to get through, we just end up saying things like add more. And so what happens is our students are thinking, well, I already told you the turtle swims. What more do you want to know? When you lean into those question words, that actually helps them be able to identify what more they could add to their sentences. Okay, so here's Sophie, and Sophie started with the turtle swims, and then notice what she's done here. She's not crossing out her whole sentence and writing again, but she's adding a little bit more. The turtle swims fast, right? And clearly you can see this turtle's really moving. Okay, now as we get more complex with this, we think about those when phrases. So I started at the Landmark School, which is a school outside of Boston for kids with language-based learning disabilities. And one of the things that we used to do, I taught in the language arts department, is we would, when they started, we would draw a big clock on a chart paper, and we would talk about things like, excuse me, morning, dawn, dusk, evening, twilight, right? So that when doesn't just have to mean 8:01 p.m. We can talk about, is it early evening, late evening, dawn, dusk, right? Daybreak, sunrise, sunset. All of those language opportunities are so critical when it comes to writing, because we need them to be able to bring that language into their written expression. So here, if our when phrase, when does this happen? Late at night. And where does it happen? In the ocean. Remember, our sentence was the turtle swims. So it might be the turtle swims late at night in the ocean. We could also say in the ocean, the turtle swims late at night, or late at night, the turtle swims in the ocean. Here's why I love this for your high flyers. So in my class, Sequoia was always like this. Mrs. Klein, excuse me, is this the right answer? And I would be like, Sequoia, it's writing. So there's not just one right answer. So the beauty of something like this is it affords opportunity for there to be lots of ways that we can do this, right? And so it's another way of building that writing community. Remember, we saw that in the research recommendations. Okay, what I also want you to notice now is the use of commas here. What the research tells us is that when students only practice grammar in isolation, they often don't make the transference into their actual writing. So now you have the opportunity to talk about why in this sentence will we have 2 commas. In the last sentence, we didn't see any. What's changed, right? So those opportunities to think about how good writers use grammatical structures to help them convey their message, this is the perfect way to do that. So late at night, In the ocean, the turtle swam in search of food. Okay. And here's a couple of examples, right, of how we can do this. So if we start the sentence with, the eggs hatched, what kind of eggs, where, and when? So what kind? Frog. Where? In the pond. When? When it was spring. Now here's our sentence. The frog eggs hatched in the pond when it was spring. See how that grows, right? And students aren't just staring into space wondering, how do I add more? We're really giving them those concrete steps to be able to do this. Okay. And maybe some of you know this book. This was one of my boys' favorite books called The Paper Bag Princess, right? And so here's the dragon, and the sentence is, the dragon arrived. Who did what, where, when, how? And again, we use the picture to be able to pull the language out for our students to support them. This dragon is exhausted. Why? Because this princess keeps tricking him to go around and around and around many, many times so that he'll get this tired, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about these connecting words. So what we know is that these connecting words play really important roles in sentences. And oftentimes students don't understand the difference between and, but, or, so. So what we want to do is we want to gradually introduce these, and we want to notice them in our mentor text. When you are reading, remember when you're reading like a writer, notice, how is the word and used? How is that different from how the word but is used, right? Then provide the opportunity for a little oral rehearsal. Can you generate a sentence with the word and? Turn and tell your partner. Let's come back together. Now let's try that same sentence, but this time we'll use the word but. How might we change things up, right? So lots of opportunities to think about the mentor text, think about oral rehearsal, and then put it into practice in their writing. Okay. I mentioned this kernel sentence. So the kernel sentence was something that was developed at Landmark by Charlie Haynes and Terry Jennings. And Charlie Haynes has done a lot of work in the field, and Terry Jennings was my mentor at Landmark as well. But basically what they did was they thought about this kernel like a popcorn kernel. So imagine a popcorn kernel that has not yet been heated and exploded. So you think about that kernel, and that's the noun and the verb. And then what you do is you say, okay, you need to elaborate and think about adjectives. But instead of saying to kids, an adjective is something that describes a noun, what they did was they said, no, let's break this down. Let's think about categories. Let's think about color, size, shape, number, right? So instead of just thinking about an adjective as something that describes a noun, what color is it? What size is it? How big is it? How many are there, right? And then we think about adding those adverbs, those words that end in ly. And then the phrases that I was telling you about, the where phrases, the when phrases. Think about that big clock that we talked about, right? And then can you compound a subject? Can you compound a predicate? How can you combine two sentences to make these compound sentences? So let's look at an example here. So if our example is the turtle swims, and we elaborate the subject thinking of, again, color, size, shape, and number, we can say the small green turtle swims, okay? The small green turtle swims quickly. Where? The small green turtle swims quickly into the seaweed. So kids are seeing how this builds, right? Remember, we're going to do a lot of direct explicit instruction with this, a lot of modeling and thinking aloud so that they begin to understand how to build this. We can then get further complex here by compounding the subject. So the turtle and his brother swim, compound the predicate. The turtle and his brother swim and float. And then how do we compound two into the combine two into a compound sentence? Turtle and his brother swim and float as the fish dart by. Okay. So I hope that was helpful for you to think about elaboration. Think about how prompting kids with those question terms and then really directly and explicitly around the adjectives, around the where phrases, the when phrases, how that will help them to have more language to pull from when they're actually writing. All right, let's talk about sentence combining. We're doing okay for time. 6:16. Okay. So when we think about sentence combining, what we know is that it improves the ability to manipulate and rearrange words. We also expand, clarify, tighten sentences. This was developed way back in the 1960s, and since then, consistently in writing, in research, the findings have proven this is an effective method from kindergarten all the way through college. Okay, we started off oral language, right? And then we're going to build as students gain their proficiency. So let's look at some basic examples of this. Now, when you do this with your students, I want you to think about those pocket charts that I showed you before. Or again, if you have it up on your board, your smart board, and you can move your parts around, that's really helpful. What I like to do is line up my sentences one on top of the other. So, and remember, this sounds a little grim, but it comes right from the book. So birds can eat baby sea turtles. Fish can eat baby sea turtles. It's dangerous to be a baby sea turtle is essentially the key there. But what we would want to do is say, okay, which words are repeated? And that's where there's benefit in lining them up. We would see can eat baby sea turtles all repeated in both sentences. So now we say to ourselves, okay, how can I combine these two sentences into one? So I can't say birds can eat baby sea turtles and fish, right? Because we have to stay true to the meaning of both of these sentences and true to the meaning of our mentor text where we pulled these from. So what I need to think about is if I can combine this, birds, fish can eat baby sea turtles, what word might I use to bring those together? I might say birds and fish can eat baby sea turtles. Now for your students, a scaffold that you might consider is maybe here you give them a choice, and or, and they choose which would help them combine. The baby turtle swims, the baby turtle dives. Now what are we going to do? What are we repeating here? The baby turtle, same thing. The baby turtle swims and dives. Okay. Now this gets a little bit more challenging. There are 6 turtle eggs. The turtle eggs are white. So they don't line up as perfectly now. So now what am I going to do? Let's think about it. There are 6 turtle
We may be having
eggs.
some technical difficulties here. Lisa, can you hear us? Oh,
Sorry. I was
are
like
you
in
good?
my own world. How long was I gone for?
Less than 30 seconds.
Okay. Oh, perfect. Okay, good. Okay, let me go back. Um, okay. Can you hear me, Jesse?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right. Thanks. Okay, so we're on the 6 turtle eggs, and what I'm saying to you is now it gets a little more complex. Okay, so now we have to think about, okay, what is it telling us about the turtle eggs? We're saying that we have to now think about there are 6 white turtle eggs. Again, I want you to notice now we're bringing in that comma. So that's our opportunity to talk to our students about how we use that comma effectively. Okay, turtles have shells. Turtles are made of bony plates. The shells get bigger as turtles grow. Now we're getting really complex here. Okay, so now we have to think about, all right, so this is really a lot about the shells. That's the kind of the common piece here. So now how can I pull that together? I'm going to say turtles have shells made of, bony plates that get bigger as turtles grow. So now I can pull that all together, okay? And as you're going back and you're thinking about doing this with your students, I want you to think about start small, right? We're going to do this orally for our younger students. We're going to use sentences that are related to what we're reading aloud or learning in science and social studies and ELA. We're not going to go to Teachers Pay Teachers for worksheets on this, right? Really pull it. There's so much there, and those repeated exposures to the vocabulary and the concepts are so helpful for our students. We want to have opportunities for kids to work collaboratively. It's really important. That provides that oral rehearsal, and we want them to talk about, why did you make that decision that you made? How did you know that's how you wanted to combine those sentences? So let them explain their thinking, okay? You can have them label those parts of speech, but remember, the goal is not to do that in isolation of the writing that they're doing. It would be in service of the writing that they are doing. And best when we can do this 2 to 3 times a week with our students so that they can really gain that proficiency. And just like with the sentence elaboration being a great tool for revision, sentence combining is an excellent tool for revision, because once they understand how to combine their sentences, you can have them go back into their work and identify, are there two shorter sentences that you could pull together to make one even stronger, more cohesive sentence, right? So it becomes something that they can take action on during revision, which can sometimes be a little bit tricky for kids and for teachers. Okay, I want to offer you this scaffold of a close activity. When we are thinking about this activity, again, we're taking off the transcription skills, really the intense transcription skills of writing all of the sentences, because that's not our objective right now, right? We're also providing the content for them so they're not spontaneously generating these sentences, really focusing on building that syntactic awareness through this activity. So here, what they're doing is we're giving them the two sentences. We show them how we're going to pull them together, but then we say, okay, which of these words would best be used in this particular sentence? Okay, so this is a scaffold that we can put into place. And remember, a scaffold, temporary support that as kids gain their proficiency, we can pull those scaffolds away. Okay. All right, well, now that we are at the end here and you've had a chance to think about teaching the sentence basics, developing syntactic awareness, how do you think improving students' sentence knowledge might improve comprehension and writing? So maybe that's something you take back to your grade level team or your PLC team, or if you're a coach, you bring it back to a faculty meeting to talk a little bit about that. We really want to think about reading and writing together, right? And how they can serve one another, and how we need to, as the leaders, the instructional leaders, allocate time to support our students in their writing. And it can't be just like Monday, Wednesday, if there's no assembly for 15 minutes, we're going to do our writing. Really need to build that time into our day using the content that we are already teaching kids. Okay, so hopefully you've had the opportunity to take some notes. You heard some things that were validating of the practices that you already are using with your students. Maybe you had a couple of ahas that you can share, and then things that you can think about bringing into your instruction, hopefully tomorrow, to support your students across the state of Florida. Okay, well, I hope we have met our objectives to think about the research recommendations, think about those strategies, and think about writing as a tool to support and increase comprehension. Jesse, do we have any questions or comments in chat?
We don't have any questions. We have lots of thank yous. Thank yous for great tips as to share with other teachers, for ideas as as some folks are creating courses for teacher professional development.
Excellent.
People really appreciate the heavy emphasis on application of these things. So that's very, very helpful.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. I hope this was helpful. Keys to Literacy has some great free resources for everyone. I'd encourage you to check those out.
All right. And thank you, Lisa. And thanks again to Keys to Literacy. I think of a quote, maybe it was Steve Graham, one of the most preeminent reading or writing researchers, said something where he was quoting someone that writing is thinking made manifest. right?
Yes.
And when we improve kids' writing and improve their syntactic awareness, improve the complexity of the writing that they're able to produce, we're improving the complexity of their ability to think. And boy, if there is any goal for schooling, it's improving our children's ability to think about and express themselves in increasingly complex and nuanced ways. So thank you so much. This was very, 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 very helpful.
Appreciate the time. Take care.
Right. I'll stop.